Joining me on the program for the first time, you may have seen him in some of our coverage, but now he is here for his first unedited, State Senator Adam Pugh, Senate Education Chairman. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here.
Before we get into the policy, let me ask you a question that I've gotten from viewers, and I've even wondered it myself. How did an Air Force guy become one of the leading education policymakers at 23rd and Lincoln?
Yeah, really good question. So I got elected in 2016, and obviously, if you remember that time, that's pre-teacher walkout. I had just come off the campaign trail, and I'm knocking on a lot of doors, and I sensed immediately there was just a lot of angst at the doorstep. People were frustrated. Teachers were underpaid. You know, I live in a community in Edmond where really our growth has been driven by our school district. So there was just a lot of frustration with what was happening at the Capitol at that particular time. When I got elected, like the majority of my classmates, we were the largest Senate freshman class ever. And when I think most of us got elected, we get to rank our committee preferences. And I actually went to them, pro tem Mike Schultz, and I said, I'll do anything but education. It seemed like people were frustrated, you know, everyone was searching for answers, and it didn't seem like anyone was going to be satisfied. Fast forward, after my first term, my predecessor was Gary Stanislawski, actually from the Tulsa area, who had chaired that committee for the previous 4 years, and so it was a committee chairmanship that was going to be up. We had a new pro tem, Senator Greg Treat, and actually went to Senator Treat and I said, I would like to chair the Education Committee. And my 4 years in that building had, given me, I think, enough experience to see that we needed some big changes. So we had gone through the teacher walkout, and I sensed there was still a lot of frustration, even though we had invested in the largest teacher pay raise in state history. And I just didn't feel like we were, innovating enough. I'm a small business owner as well. I have an aerospace and defense company. And so I also look at it from the workforce and the economic side of things. And what it seemed to me was that our education system wasn't aligned with what our workforce needs were to help our state grow. So I thought I brought obviously an outside perspective, but I went to the pro tem and I said I'd like to chair the education committee. I think he was shocked at first because not a lot of people asked to chair that committee, because it is a challenging committee where people have strong feelings, right? I mean, this is the most personal thing we do, is educate our kids, and it's also the most common experience most Oklahomans have, right? They have kids, they're raising their kids, they send their kids off to school. And so people have very strong feelings about what happens in my committee. They have strong feelings and strong opinions on education in general. And I just felt like the committee needed a leader who was willing to go tackle hard issues, willing to collaborate and try to build consensus amongst parents and educators and advocacy groups. And so over the last 5 years, I'm very proud of the work that we've done as a committee and as a legislature, but also, I think we've been able to say this is where we want to go as the Senate Education Committee. And I just felt like that was lacking, that no one really knew what was our goal, what was the direction of education in the state of Oklahoma. And I think that was a skill set I learned obviously in the military, and I think I've honed through my businesses. And so that's kind of a roundabout way how I got there, but it's been really a privilege and an honor. And I've met some wonderful people around the state, and I get to go into schools and classrooms all across Oklahoma and see what the needs are right there inside the classroom.
Let's dive into some policy real quick. I want to read something to you. You may have seen it, the superintendent's welcome back to school letter. I won't read the whole thing, but there was a section that stood out to me, and there is a grammatical error in it. We are committed to focused on supporting families so that every child comes to school ready to learn and thrive. This means ensuring access to nutritious meals covered by your tax dollars. This does not have legislative approval on it. This does not have state board approval on it. I don't know what's worse, that he signed his name on this and put it out to families, or a family is going to read this and not send their kid to school with lunch money.
Yeah.
How do you respond to this school meal plan that people have been told is happening? They believe what he's saying. Obviously, they're going to go to school and they're going to be charged for lunch.
Yeah, this has been, just a challenge we've had in several policy areas, is that it doesn't seem like we're all on the same page. And it's frustrating for me because I think there's a willingness from the legislature to partner with the State Department, to partner with the governor's office, and again, take us in a direction that we want to go. And oftentimes I think we're just marching to our own beat. And this is a perfect example. We've been talking about the school lunch program for a number of years. I actually have an interim study this year looking at nutrition inside of schools and how we can stimulate local ag economies and partner with local food sources to really change the way we do the school lunch program at large. And it's something a lot of my colleagues are interested in from both sides of the aisle. But I don't think this particular way of tackling the issue is helpful. It's a complicated issue because you're dealing with different, what I'm going to say, colors of money. Yeah. So when you receive dollars, whether it be from the federal government or from state and local government, that money is obligated towards certain lines of expense. And so you can't just look at a bank account and say, hey, there's X amount of dollars here, let's just do this with it. Some of those dollars can only be spent on operational costs. Some of those dollars are specifically allocated for transportation or for teacher salaries. If they're federal dollars, they may be for specific programs like literacy initiatives, as an example. We've allocated a lot of money over the past couple of years to school safety. And so to just say, well, there's a lot of money in a bank account that a school has access to, let's just do program X, there's rules and laws attached to those different pots of money, and you can't intermingle or commingle those dollars. So I understand that it's something that seems to be of interest, not only to the State Department, but to parents and educators and school administrators have been talking about this for a long time. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. Budgets at every school district across the state were approved probably in April or May of this past year. That letter came out, I think, sometime in July. And so you already have budgets that have been approved for the upcoming school year. You're 3 or 4 weeks away from starting school, and now you're going to upend, a school budgets process that's been voted on. Those are locally elected school officials sitting on the school board that have decided what their priorities are. And while there are times when I disagree with how maybe school districts spend money, we have to be very careful to recognize that local control component and then work together. So this is an issue we should be talking about. And I think a lot of people want to talk about it at the Capitol. But the way to do that isn't necessarily to send out an email directly to parents where the school leaders aren't even hearing about it. Yeah. They're getting, I as the chair of the education committee, I got the same email as a parent of 3 little kids in Edmond Public Schools. And so rather than bringing everyone together and saying, hey, this is an issue we want to tackle, how do we get to the end state, which is to maximize the efficiency and the effectiveness of these dollars for the school lunch program, we're doing something that by law is not allowed, mixing dollars, and really caught, I think, everybody by surprise. So now we're really having to unwind a bit what parents are thinking, as you mentioned, is going to be happening in schools when they're showing up and wondering, why is my kid still having to pay for their meals?
And now we're experiencing that with state testing as well.
Yeah.
I did a story just yesterday. Some districts have told their families, until we hear from guys like you, we're not doing anything. Other districts are saying, we can't wait to pick our vendor.
Right.
And when I have had the superintendent on the program recently, he says he doesn't need to work with you. He doesn't need to work with the board. I'm concerned families are hearing, it's been a summer of promises. Lee Greenwood's going to donate a bunch of Bibles, free school meals, PragerU test to test woke teachers, American Virtual Academy, now testing changes. And he says he doesn't need the state board or y'all's approval. That's not the way the law is written, but families are hearing these promises. What do you say to families who have heard all of these things and then they go to school and it's not happening?
Yeah, it's been a challenge that I've experienced, certainly. And again, there's a willingness and a desire to work together. I'm excited about some of these initiatives. We've been talking about state testing for years, and it seems like there's a lot of support from parents, from educators to just reimagine the way we benchmark, students' progress, the way we measure growth, and making sure it's not just one single snapshot on a particular day at the end of the school year to determine, is a child prepared for whatever's next, the next grade or what comes after graduation. And unfortunately, it seems like we put the cart before the horse in this particular situation. In fact, just yesterday, the U.S. Department of Education actually came out and said, well, none of this is true. There's no waiver that's been granted. This seems very premature. In fact, I did some research across the country. There are only a handful of states who've actually been given an opportunity to pilot this, where they got an ESSA waiver from the U.S. Department of Education, and now they're trying benchmark tests and different types of assessments as opposed to this, end of year assessment. But no matter what the federal government says, it is still law in Title 70 that we will have state testing at the end of the year for certain grades and certain subjects. So even if the feds were to grant that waiver today, as an example, the law does not allow school districts to go through the process of eliminating state testing. The legislature is very interested in hearing from educators, how can we redo our state testing where we're really giving teachers the ability to set the stage for measuring a child's growth and measuring their proficiency. But we haven't heard from those teachers yet because this conversation kind of, was really thrown at us. So I knew that it was something everyone's been talking about, but I think it caught the legislature again. It caught us off guard when we saw the press release and we saw that it was directed at parents. And now parents, I was just in my neighborhood the night before school walking the dogs, and I had 3 different parents ask me as I was on my walk, hey, is it true we're getting rid of state testing? And I had to actually explain to them, well, we're talking about it, but the law does not allow for that. It's certainly not going to happen in the school year 25-26. It may, if the legislature passes a law and we get a federal waiver, happen in school year 26-27. But we need to go out and find vendors. It's not just school districts finding their own vendor. If you even read further in the details, it says the State Department will pick the vendor. Well, the problem for school districts is, let's say you have multiple vendors. How do you assess now one school's performance versus another, right? How do you standardize and normalize those tests? The A through F report card, which has gone through a radical change over the last couple of years, thanks to the work of the House and the Senate, it is required to measure and report on that end of year testing. So we would have to once again change our A through F school report card and how we measure schools based on academic performance and academic growth. And we don't have a way to do that right now if we just carte blanche get rid of state testing.
So as you all have a role in this, when do you say, Superintendent, slow your roll, we got to work together? Is there going to be an announcement or something? Or do you go to these districts and say, hey, let's all breathe, business as usual until you hear from us? Yeah,
I think, for me, I've have a very good relationship, honestly, with superintendent. And so I try really hard. I'm never going to communicate through press release or, by some, angry tweet or Facebook post. So I always try to engage, kneecap to kneecap, as we say in my company, face to face, and say, hey, I'm not quite sure, that you have the authority to do that. It is the challenge when you have a statewide elected official that we have to respect the will of the voters here, and for sure, I think based on the elections of the election results 3 years ago, we recognize that hey, this is who the people want to run the State Department of Education. And so we have to be very sensitive to the authority that a statewide elected official has in any capacity. We have multiple statewide elected officials running agencies. But at the same time, for me, I'm always going to, try to collaborate and say, hey, look, you do have to work with the Board of Education. You do have to work with the legislature. We don't want to be an obstacle or an impediment, but we do have to be respectful of the fact that it's the legislature that makes the laws, right? And then the State Department, through rulemaking and their administrative authority, get to work to implement the laws that we have on the books. And it's not, I just get to wave a magic wand and say, I want to do this. I think, again, there's a lot of desire to do a number of the things being talked about, but if school districts just start thinking they can do whatever they want because that's what they've been told or granted permission from the State Department of Education, that's not true if the law says otherwise. And I think for a lot of school leaders, which I maintain healthy relationships with, they recognize that this may be a great idea and it may be very popular, but until the legislature itself changes the law in Title 70, we will continue to have state testing at least for this school year.
So let me ask you, and you kind of brought it up, you do have good relationships with, I don't know how, but you thread that needle with the pro-public ed and the school choice folks. Are you thinking of running for superintendent yourself?
That's a good question. It's probably not a question I'm prepared to answer. I've had a lot of people ask,
a lot of people are wondering.
I'm always going to be candid. Some people maybe appreciate that at the Capitol and some people probably don't. Frankly, maybe that's the military guy in me. But I've been asked that by a number of people, and it's certainly something I'm thinking about and looking at. Those are big decisions to make. That's not something I take lightly, Rick. I mean, that's a statewide campaign, and it's a lot of responsibility, and it's an important responsibility. You know, again, I go back to, it's the most personal thing we do is educate our kids. And so we've got to get that right. I think in some ways, you know, people look at the state of Oklahoma and they judge us on our education system, right? I mean, I have a lot of friends from the military that move here, and it's the first thing they're thinking about. Hey, where am I going to live based on the schools? Or, oh my goodness, I'm going to Oklahoma. You know, what am I going to do, you know, to educate my kids? And so it's a really important responsibility. And so it's something that I've talked about and thinking about, but I'm certainly not prepared to make a decision because I understand the gravity and the weight of it.
Senator, I'm out of time. We could talk for hours.
Yeah, we could.
Thank you for stopping by.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Let's have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. We love it.
Thank you.